Dear friends and colleagues, today we are here on behalf of civil society networks in the least developed countries and in most vulnerable countries. On behalf of these networks active in LDCs and MVCs, we are four at this moment here. In my left-hand side, we have Ms. Sharmind Nilormi, who is the General Secretary of Campaign for Sustainable Rural Livelihoods, CSRL, an alliance of 250 grassroots organizations active in Bangladesh. In my right-hand side, we have Sanjoy Vasist, who is the Director of Climate Action Network South Asia. And besides Sanjoy, we have Mr. Rezaul Karim Choudhury, who is the Chief Moderator of Equity and Justice Working Group active in Bangladesh. My name is Ziaul Haq Mukta. I am the President of Campaign for Sustainable Rural Livelihoods in Bangladesh. In every COP, on behalf of these alliance of networks, we place our expectations as well as we express our reactions at the end of the Conference of Parties in this process. So this year, we will be following the same that we do generally in the Conference of Parties. So at the beginning, I will request my colleague Ms. Sharmind Nilormi to read out the statement that we have placed before you.
Thank you. We, the civil society networks working on issues around climate change in least developed and vulnerable countries, are profoundly keen to stress that Marrakech must focus on the process of strengthening global ambition in line with achieving well below 2 degrees Celsius and more preferably the coveted goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius as enshrined in the Paris Agreement. Without being increasingly ambitious, the catastrophe awaiting us cannot be avoided, leaving behind deaths, insurmountable losses in ecosystem services, and partial to complete damages to livelihoods of the poorest and the most vulnerable. We are here to find modalities of translating Paris Agreement into firm actions and setting rules and procedures to implement such actions. An enhanced global ambition is the key to deliver the goals within the Paris Agreement. Within the purview of a global mitigation ambition, the provisions under Article 3 must be expressed in terms of long-term mitigation strategy of all parties, accommodating much enhanced ambitious mitigation targets, keeping in mind common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capacities, CBDRRC, principle of the Climate Convention. We acknowledge that the nationally determined contributions, NDCs, those were placed in 2015 collectively, place emissions into a downward trajectory. However, we reiterate our deep concerns regarding emission gap scenario, which clearly shows that our ultimate greenhouse gas curve remains with full realization of published NDCs by all parties on a pathway towards 3.4 degree centigrade warming by 2100, which is a terrifying reality in many least developed countries, small island states, and vulnerable African countries. We cannot afford timeouts and continued rhetoric. We affirm our position in favor of 1.5 degrees centigrade warming limit, which science tells us as feasible and beneficial for humankind and the only planet that exists for their living. We urge upon the parties to put together their acts accordingly. The facilitative dialogue in 2016 and 2018, the first global stocktaking in 2023, are the process to assess progress and scale up ambition. We expect COP22 will successfully delineate and agree on a process to define modalities for the 2018 dialogue for enhanced mitigation ambition. 1.5 degree is just to survive, difficult is not impossible. In order to achieve 1.5 degrees centigrade warming ambition in reality, the parties must exhibit their commitment under the UNFCCC process towards paving the way for a concerted global effort under the CBDRRC. For that, additional efforts in pre-2020 period is critical. We urge upon the parties to commit significantly higher ambition in their LDCs to be submitted before COP CMP in 2018. Also, we stress that the peaking as soon as possible stated in Paris Agreement must be specific within COP process, and we call for different peaking years for different countries based on CBDRRC principle. Therefore, we propose a timeline for peaking applicable for different countries as per the following rules. Developed countries, Annex 1 to UNFCCC, primary polluters with very high historical responsibility by 2020. Developing high-emitting countries, low overall emission, however exhibiting much higher emission to result in considerable historical responsibility leading up to Paris Agreement by 2025. Developing countries having overall low historical responsibility by 2035. Transparent, inclusive, facilitative dialogue among parties and observers. While the Paris Agreement rightly recognized the importance of scaling of climate change efforts, it failed to provide direction on how respective country mitigation efforts should be increased over time in line with the global pathway to limit within 1.5 degrees centigrade warming. We expect COP22 to decide on the format for inclusive discussion. We also call for a continued, transparent and inclusive process for the proposed dialogues. Global goal on adaptation, defining and formulating modalities for LDCs and MVCs. Under paragraph 1 of the Article 7, parties establish the global goal on adaptation of enhancing adaptive capacity, strengthening resilience and reducing vulnerability to climate change with a view to contributing to sustainable development and ensuring an adequate adaptation response in the context of the temperature goal stated in Article 2. We urge that adaptation global goal must not end up with numbers only. In this regard, we need to learn from our experiences on CDM process and develop a modality to recognize adaptation efforts in different categories of countries, including LDCs and MVCs. Financing must be additional and grant-based, balancing adaptation and mitigation. COP22 should require significant progress in long-term adaptation finance goals and improving rules for accounting for climate finance in the context of the US $100 billion roadmap. We urge upon that COP22 must also provide clear indication regarding climate finance, which must be additional to overseas development assistance. The need for real balance between mitigation and adaptation expenditure, as well as finding ways to finance loss and damage, are essential to move the finance agenda forward. We call the enhanced grant-based climate finance also need a clear position on it. Loss and damage, a clear roadmap required. The Warsaw International Mechanism, WIM, for loss and damage will be evaluated for the first time here and gives parties an opportunity to make steps to strengthen it and give it financial sketch. WIM has not yet come close to deliver bold actions to protect the interests of vulnerable people. We welcome the WIM Executive Committee for listing finance as their top priority. However, we stress on the scaled-up financing for loss and damage, but again, we are concerned how that can be delivered if WIM's current framework only contains a placeholder for finance. Loss and damage finance needs significant finance mechanism separate from adaptation finance. Climate-induced migrants needs special provision. We express our disappointment that despite several provisions agreed by the UNFCCC process and its parties to discuss the issues around displacement, and more of those have been addressed, and none of them have been addressed. We urge upon the parties to discuss and agree on issues around displacement and relevant issues. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sharmin Dilurmi, General Secretary, Campaign for Sustainable Rural Livelihoods. Friends, we have 13 minutes in our hand. I'll request Sanjay Vasist and Mr. Rezal Kurum Choudhury to speak on some specific issues, especially as you have followed that in our statement we have prioritized the issue of ambition, and we are asking for picking a specific commitment in the process. So that's why I will request Mr. Sanjay Vasist, Director, Climate Action Network South Asia, to detail out what we feel on the issue of ambition, and I'll be requesting him to conclude in 4 minutes. Thank you.
Lesser than that. Thank you, Muktabhai. In Marrakech, now we are here in day 2. There is a sense of celebration that Paris Agreement has brought global community together to put world towards 1.5 degree, at least to make an effort to put world towards 1.5 degree. And we are here to frame modalities on how to implement Paris Agreement. However, collective efforts cannot be great without strong foundation. Action needs to be scaled up from now to 2020 also. We should not ignore the sight of pre-2020 for accelerated action on Paris Agreement. Thus, pre-2020 ambition or action is important for success of Paris Agreement while we prepare for rules of implementation from 2020 to 2030. Momentum of pre-2020 will be crucial to add speed to Paris Agreement from 2020 to 2030. For least developing countries, while mitigation is important and ambitions in terms of mitigation numbers need to be higher, in line with 1.5 degree, adaptation and loss and damage are other 2 pillars that cannot be ignored. Mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage need to be enabled through predictable finance so that actions can be implemented on ground. This year in South Asia, we have seen simultaneously flood and drought situation that has overstretched disaster risk reduction community. And that is, all this catastrophe is happening when temperature is near 1.1 degree centigrade. So, and we can imagine what would that be with 2.7 degree, where we are heading now, taking into account all numbers on nationally determined contributions. To conclude, I would urge that we should not ignore pre-2020 ambition that need to be implemented, that need to be scaled up. Ambitious mitigation numbers need to be put on table. Facilitated dialogue is due in 2018, is an opportunity to again move toward 1.5 degree. And upcoming NAP review is also an opportunity where implementation of adaptation can be put on cards by Marrakech. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Sanjay Vasist. So now I will request Mr. Rezal Kurum Choudhury to speak.
Thank you, Muktabhai. We have said already in the beginning that we are speaking on behalf of most vulnerable countries and least developed countries. And even you have already heard that what the NDC has given, this will lead to more than 3.5 degrees Celsius. Even there will be ambitions will be increased. There will be more cyclones, floods, droughts, slow and rapid onset disasters in especially most vulnerable countries, Philippines, Bangladesh, different islands. So for these countries, for MVCs, the loss and damage is very much important. So what we have demanded that this is the year, this is the conference, COP22, where we want something very tangible output regarding the loss and damage, especially from the worst implementation mechanism. So the Warsaw Implementation Mechanism has to declare some deliberation in this conference. Number two, we also demand a finance allocation in this regard too, that in respect of loss, in respect of damage, what will be happen, how this will be given to the MVC countries. Third, although in Article 8 it has not mentioned regarding the climate-induced displacement, although there are some sort of process going, happening above than more than in this forum, apart from UNFCCC forum, but we expected that there are some multiplications, copying of Cancun 14 para F regarding the climate-induced migrants. So we urge the parties to include the climate-induced displacement in the loss and damage discourse. Thank you.
Thank you, Rizal Karim Choudhury. We'd like to reiterate one point, friends, that since 2010, we have seen that several times the parties and the UNFCCC process have stated some paragraphs regarding displacement, rehabilitation, planned relocation, migration, and relevant issues. But never the parties and UNFCCC process have followed those commitments. We think that this is a betrayal to the people who are suffering in the low-lying countries. We urge parties and UNFCCC process to reconsider the paragraphs and decisions that have been taken since 2010 on the issue of displacement. So now we have few more minutes. I am requesting you, if there is any question, please stand up and raise your question. One of our panelists would be answering. Yes, please. And please introduce yourself at the beginning.
Thank you. I'm Yuichiro from Japanese news agency, Kyodo News. And I have a question about what do you expect from the developed countries, such as including Japan? And could you give some examples of the needs of the developing countries, such as in adaptation and such as in loss and damages?
Yeah, raise your hand.
Yeah. As you are asking question about, specifically about the Japan, we heard that Japan still is investing huge amount of money in respect of coal. So this is a contradiction of Japan commitment toward the Paris Agreement, while we have committed to go for 2 degrees Celsius, even further down 1 point Celsius. So it's a kind of a very wrong signal, especially to the most vulnerable countries. So our urge to Japan government to drop the investment in the coal, and rather Japan is a highly technologically advanced countries. We expect some innovation from the Japan in respect of renewable energy innovation in this regard.
Yeah. I'll also add here, let me also acknowledge before I raise my expectations, I'll share my expectations. Japan government has already investing a lot more on adaptation, at least bringing adaptation practitioners and stakeholders together in Asia and Pacific. So that's one example which certainly we welcome, and this needs to continue, and this needs to be at a higher scale also. Adding that, I would again reaffirm what Reza Bhai has said, that Japanese technologies are known and can certainly provide a lot of solutions to move towards new energy and also build resilience among most vulnerable countries. So certainly that's what we expect, and we understand that after Fukushima nuclear disaster, coal is becoming a central source of energy, but there is much more to be achieved from renewable energy. This is the time when Japan is transiting from nuclear to alternative source of energy. It should be on solar and wind.
Thank you, Sanjoy. There is one. So we have 4 minutes. Please introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Sadie. I'm with the Climate Youth Delegation. My question is, what are your thoughts on developing countries such as Canada, the United States, particularly Canada, because that's where I'm from, including offsetting within their climate plan to say that they're contributing to addressing climate change on a global level due to the actions that are taking place within developing countries that they are somewhat including within their climate finance, and rather than addressing the actions that are taking place within Canada, are Canadian-based companies that are going through other countries to that are exploiting the environment. And then, yeah, okay.
You finish in 1 minute.
Yeah. Well, offsetting, basically transferring the own burden to other by paying money is not welcome. When we talk about mitigation, and especially in terms of sustainable lifestyle, it is important that we reduce wasteful luxury lifestyle. That can only happen in Canada, country like Canada, rather than offsetting and asking developing country to offset. So we cannot certainly, we do not support offsetting to maintain luxury lifestyle and wasteful lifestyle.
Thank you. We are at the end of the press conference, so now I will request my colleague Sharmin to focus a little on the issue of picking.
Before going into picking, I want to respond to the earlier question regarding offsetting. In Paris Agreement, it has been stated in different sections and articles, especially Article 2, that the countries need to reduce emission throughout their respective economies. So it is economy-wide emission reduction. And there are mechanisms for market-based carbon trading and all that, but that is not the highlight of that agreement. So the focus is on country-driven emission reduction. And regarding picking, as we have said already, that the different countries, depending on CBD or RC principle, they need to limit emissions by different time period, and we stress the pre-2020 actions in that regard, and we urge upon COP22 to have distinct guidelines for this picking time frame, rather than which is stated in Paris Agreement, as soon as possible.
3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Is there any other question? We have 2 minutes more. Okay, so let me conclude, Yeah. Okay.
My name is Tina. I'm also with the Canadian Youth Delegation. A lot of poor nations and vulnerable nations have asked that in order for them to reduce further emissions, that they need some sort of financial support. What is ways in which, countries like Canada could help in that, and how, I guess, what is something tangible in terms of financial support that we could give to those countries?
No, I think this needs to come from you. Okay. Well, you want to start? Why not? Okay. Please.
Okay. First of all, additional financing is very welcome, and that is very much required. But at the same token, we urge upon changes in lifestyle, which will help in a significant way to, limit the greenhouse gas emissions. So that is the first priority that needs to be stressed, and then additional financing, of course, that is very much welcome.
Want to add something?
Yeah. Well. Again, new and additional climate finance, not the recycled one, is important through Green Climate Fund, and that too, a public funding is important, finance is important. Private investments in terms of promoting renewable energy in developing countries is key, because we can certainly continue investing into adaptation, but unless ambitious mitigation happens, adaptation will not suffice. We are going to lose our ecosystems, we are going to lose people, we're going to lose their livelihoods also.
Thank you very much. Let's conclude the session in 1 minute. My colleagues will be available here. If you have any other question, we can discuss. Let me tell you again who are the people here. Mr. Rezaul Karim Choudhury, He is the Chief Moderator of Equity and Justice Working Group based in Bangladesh. Sanjoy Vasist, he is the Director of Climate Action Network South Asia. Myself, Ziaul Haq Mukta, President of the Campaign for Sustainable Rural Livelihoods in Bangladesh. And Sharmind Nilurmi, she is the General Secretary of Campaign for Sustainable Rural Livelihoods. We are here on behalf of the civil society networks in the least developed and most vulnerable countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.